G'day boys, so today we're actually looking at Australian time zones. So a time zone is where if it's a particular time in Queensland, there might be a different time in Northern Territory as opposed to Western Australia. A time zone certainly depends on where you live in the world and where the lines of meridian fall. So for Australia, if we have a look at this particular picture here, okay, we actually have three different time zones in Australia. Okay, so the first thing you need to identify is this little bit of a dotted line that runs all the way down, okay, through each of these states. Okay, those lines signify three different time zones. Okay, there's a time zone here, there's a time zone here, and there's a time zone here. Okay, they actually have names. They're called the Western, Central, and Eastern time zone. Now, if we have a look, what time zone are we in? Okay, where do we live? Obviously, we live in Brisbane, so we live in the Eastern time zone. Okay, there's a little bit of a difference between the three. If we have a look, when it is 12 noon, okay, in Brisbane, when it is 12 noon in Brisbane, which is midday, it is 11:30 a.m. in the central time zone of Australia. So number two, okay, half an hour earlier than Brisbane or behind Brisbane, if that makes sense. So any state or city that falls in the central part of Australia is half an hour behind Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne. Okay, so we can see that here, 11:30 a.m. Okay, if it is midday in Brisbane. Now, if it is midday in Brisbane or 12 noon in Brisbane, what time would it be in Perth? So if we have 12 o'clock in Brisbane, okay, what time would it be in Perth? If we have a look, it is 2 hours behind the western side of Australia. Okay, so if it is 12 o'clock in Brisbane, if we take 2 hours back, that means that in Perth, it would be 10 a.m. Okay, in Perth. So the western side of Australia is 2 hours, okay, behind the eastern. Now, let's have a look. Let's do a little bit of a different one. If the time was in Northern Territory, if the time in NT was 10 p.m., okay, what would the time be in Broome? So let's have a look. The Broome is in the western time zone of Australia, okay, and let's just write Broome here. And the Northern Territory is in the central part of Australia. So let's have a look. When it is 11:30 in the central part, it is 10 a.m. in the western part. So that means that the western part is 1 hour and 30 minutes behind the central part of Australia. So if it is 10 p.m. in Northern Territory and Broome is 1.5 hours behind the Northern Territory, let's work out what time it would be. Let's take an hour away from 10 o'clock. That means it would be 9 o'clock. And then we got to worry about this half an hour as well. So if we take 30 minutes from 9 o'clock, it becomes 8:30. Now, if it was PM in NT, it's still PM in Broome. Okay, so the big thing you need to remember, boys, is there is a half an hour time difference between Central and Eastern, and there is a 2 hour time difference between Western and Eastern. Then there is a 1.5 hour time difference between Western and Central. Okay, that's the first thing you need to know. Alrighty, let's solve this question down here. If I boarded a plane in Brisbane at 8:45 a.m., okay, 8:45 a.m., what time would it be in Perth? Now, we should know straight away that between Eastern and Western, it's a 2 hour time difference. Okay, so if it is 8:45 a.m. in Brisbane, if we take 2 hours away from our time, so 2 hours away from 8, we should know that we're left with 6:45 a.m. in Perth because it is 2 hours behind. Okay, awesome. That's the first thing. Let's do a couple more. Let's do a couple more here. Okay, if it is 12 noon in Brisbane, all right, so it's midday in Brisbane, what time would it be in Broome? This one's pretty easy because this is already the time that we get given. If it's 12 noon in Brisbane, okay, it is 2 hours behind in Broome, so that means it would be 10 a.m. because it's morning. Noon is midday, so 10 a.m. would be in the morning. Okay, fantastic. Let's have a look now at the next one. If it is 12 midnight, so 12 p.m., okay, or 12 a.m. in Sydney, okay, here's Sydney. What would the time be in Darwin? All right, so I've scribbled over Darwin here, but Darwin belongs in the central time zone of Australia. And we should know that between the Eastern and Central, it is only half an hour difference. So if we take half an hour from midnight, we're left with 11:30 p.m. because it's at night still. Okay, it's 11:30 at night. We're nearly ticked over to a new day, not just yet. Alrighty, the final one here, boys, is we've got 2 p.m. in Perth. What would the time be in Alice Springs? So let's have a look. Here's Perth. Okay, here's Alice Springs. So we've got the Western time zone and the Central time zone. There's an hour and a half difference between the two. So if it is 2 p.m., so 1 hour, 30 minutes difference between Perth and Alice Springs. If it is 2 p.m. in Perth, we need to add on 1 hour and 30 minutes, not take it away. We need to add it on because Perth is behind Alice Springs. So we need to add on 1 hour and 30 minutes. So if we add on 1 hour, that becomes 3 o'clock. And if we add on the 30 minutes, it becomes 3:30. And it's PM still. It's in the afternoon. So that's the tricky one, boys. How you got to look at where the actual city and state is. If it's in the western part and you need to work out what the central eastern is, you need to add time. But if you're going backwards, if you're starting in the eastern and you got to work out central or western, that's when you take away time. Hopefully that helps. I want you guys to complete 8.11 in your stepping stones book and we'll go through it. Thanks, boys.